£209,600. That is the median household wealth in this country at age 40. Not the super rich ones, not the strugglers, the exact middle. And in 1 second, I'll give you all of the other bandings, right? 30, 40, 50, all that sort of stuff, straight off the ONS data. But I know what you're going to do with them. I know what you're going to do with that data, because everybody does exactly the same thing. What you're going to do is you're going to scan down, you're going to find your age and feel one of two things. You're going to feel a bit sick or a bit smug. So before you see a single figure, what I need you to know is that the ones that are potentially feeling smug in this situation are actually often the ones in worse shape than the ones that are feeling sick. Not always, obviously, but often enough that, you know what? I would put some money on it. Honestly, same number on the page, completely different life going on underneath it. Now, we'll get to why, but let's have a look at the good old numbers first. These come from the Office of National Statistics, the Wealth and Assets Survey, which that's kind of like the big one. That's the main one that everyone uses. This was measured over about 15,000 households. It's the latest one. It runs from kind of like April 2020 to March 2022. So the median household wealth across Great Britain is 293,700. And the median, of course, is a really important measure because it does it a lot better. It just means middle, right? So if you line up every household from like lowest to highest, whoever's standing in the middle is the median. It's the kind of most honest figure that you can get, because the regular average always gets hauled upwards massively by a handful of huge outliers, people who have significantly larger slice of wealth, essentially. So let's have a look. So by age then, separating it down. Under 25 is 15,200. From 25 to 34 is 109,800. From 35 to 44 is 209,600. 45 to 54, 301,900. 55 to 64, you're getting up to near 500,000 there. 496,500. 65 to 74, 502,500. After this, it starts sliding back down as things like pensions get spent and other assets get spent on basically later life needs. Right. So there you go. There's the numbers. Okay. You got yours in your head. I bet you have, depending on where you are on that line. Okay. What I want you to do is hold on to that figure. Okay. Because I'm going to do something with it in a minute that might just completely change your perspective on how you're feeling about these numbers. Now, there is one thing about these numbers that also matters enormously, right? And sometimes doesn't get mentioned at all. They are household numbers, firstly, not per person. So that's the whole that's the whole house, right? So 2 salaries, if there's 2 of you, both pensions, both the equity that you share. So if you're single and you've been measuring yourself against the 209,600, you're putting yourself up, one of you against 2 of them, which is a completely irrelevant and fairly brutal way to keep score, okay? And another thing to make note of is that the spread underneath the middle is enormous. So don't sort of read it as a target either. The wealthiest 10% of households have 1.2 million or more. And the top 1% are north of 3 million, which is why if you've been aiming at the average, you've been aiming sort of like at a number that almost describes kind of nobody really. Now, let's have a look at that number that you're holding onto in your head, okay? Everyone stops reading the second that they found themselves in that row and completely switches off, like I said. But the far more interesting question is sitting a little bit deeper underneath all of that. What is that figure actually made up of? This is the most important part. So that exact same survey found that 40% of household wealth in this country is property. and 35% is in private pensions, or just pensions generally. And then 14% is actual financial wealth. So that is savings, investments, things like that sort of thing. And then 10% is the physical stuff, right? Cars, furniture, paintings, all the stuff in the loft. So the question then is what does that tell us? Well, what it tells us is that 3/4 of the nation's wealth is in a house that they're living in and a pot that you can't open yet or touch for a few years, right? That is pretty damning evidence, which brings me to the figure that I think should be on the front page every time one of these surveys comes out. And it's the thing that I focus on completely in regards to my own assets and my own wealth. Median household financial wealth, the actual money, the savings, the investments, things like that, that comes out to £10,400. Total wealth, 293,700. But money you could get your hands on this month, about 10 grand. That's about 3.5% of that overall figure. And in the 25 to 34 group, it's £1,300. 1,300 quid, sitting underneath a headline of £110,000, basically. Look, I used to be as bad with this as anyone else, though, genuinely. Years ago, I had a spreadsheet that I updated on the first Sunday, I think it was, of every single month. House value, mortgage balance, pension, the lot of it, right? Everything in there. I was really obsessive over it, and I'd watch the bottom right-hand cell tick up and feel genuinely pleased with myself, right? The sort of total column was like, yeah, this is really good. It sort of motivated me. It was really great. And at one point, that little cell, that total, said something in like the low six figures, whilst at the same time, I genuinely had like, I was living like month to month in terms of my actual income and my flow, right? So basically at that point, I was rich on a spreadsheet, but skin in the supermarket, right? I couldn't really see the difference on the spreadsheet because the spreadsheet only had one number on it, and that number was ticking up nicely every single month. The reality is that you can't just take a brick out of your house and amble off down to Waitrose and pay with your shopping with it, okay? You just cannot do that. That's the whole thing in one simple sentence. Now, property equity is real wealth. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Of course it is. But it does nothing for you until you either sell the place that you live in, which most people just genuinely do not do, or borrow against it and potentially release capital, which means one thing. It means asking for the bank's permission if you're going to remortgage and sort of pull some capital out. But here's the problem, right? You get to situations like this. Ask anyone who tried to remortgage an equity release in 2022. Now, the equity hadn't moved an inch in their property, right? It still would have been worth whatever it was at that particular time. But what had is what it cost to unlock it. Now, that more or less overnight had kind of completely changed and almost doubled. A lot of people found themselves that they found that the door had quietly shut on how to actually release that liquidity while they're still admiring the equity number on the spreadsheet. The era of low mortgage rates and easy equity release was basically completely over. And a pension, I would say, is truly one of the best places your money will ever sit. Honestly, if you've watched any of my videos, you will know that I'm a huge advocate for pensions, particularly for high earners, right? But for most of us, it's a savings account with a bouncer on the door. You cannot get to your pension until 57, right? That's the normal minimum pension age. It's going up from 55 in April 2028, but let's just say it's 57 for the time being. So what does that actually tell us? Well, let's run a scenario to see what it means. Let's look at two different people, both worth £350,000. Identical, right? Same row on that chart, same age, everything on paper, exactly the same. The first one has £330,000 worth of home equity, right? Equity in their property, and £20,000 in cash savings. The second one only has £150,000 in home equity, but £200,000 in a stocks and shares ISA. Now, on paper, they're twins, £350,000 each worth of net worth. In practice, they're not living the same life at all. I see this constantly, and it turns up the same way almost every single time, right? Someone in their late 40s, mortgage, like not necessarily gone, but a big chunk of the mortgage has been tackled, house worth a fortune because house prices have just gone up, and they're quietly pleased with where they've gotten to in terms of net worth. And fairly, right? On paper, they've done well. Their net worth is high. But then I always ask a boring but absolutely critical question. What if your income stopped on Friday? What happens? And there is always a big, horrible, horrible pause. Okay? Because the answer is almost always that inside of a month or two, they would be really struggling. They'd put the weekly shop on a credit card. In all the while sitting in a house worth £500,000. Now, that's not a story or an observation about recklessness, right? That's someone who did everything that they were told in the order that they were told to do it. Which brings me, by the way, to the advice sitting behind most of all of this. Advice so sensible sounding that nobody ever really pokes any holes in it to have a look at what goes underneath, sort of above and beyond some of the binary maths. What's the logic? Clear the mortgage, get debt free, overpay whenever you can. And look, when mortgage rates are high, overpaying your mortgage, it's not daft at all. It's a guaranteed rate of return, plus all the psychological benefits that go along with that, and the fact that you don't have to service the debt, and so on and so forth. But if you're overpaying massively and focusing on that while you've got like $2,000 in the bank, you're taking money that you could reach and burying it into a wall that you can't then dig into. It's like plastering £50 notes into a wall and calling it progress, right? And it makes sense because on your little net worth tracker, the total goes up exactly the same either way, whichever route that you go down with that whole thing. But here is the truth of this situation. Wealth, true wealth, this is the biggest thing that I've noticed over my time doing this. True wealth is not a number. It's not an amount. It's actually a length of time. Okay? It's a length of time. And the only question really that has ever mattered in all of this is if every source of income stopped tomorrow morning, so you lost your job or you couldn't work or whatever, how long could you carry on living your life before anything had to change or you'd be destitute? A month? 4 months? 2 years maybe? Who knows? That is your real number. This is the thing that you should be focusing on, okay? Not some arbitrary net worth generator. That is your real number. And almost nobody talks about it or publishes it, okay? And once you see it that way, the whole wealth building job and the way that you're accumulating your various pockets of wealth splits into kind of two jobs, right? There's making the total bigger, right? And then there's making more of it reachable and having that adaptability and flexibility. And I would say they are pretty much two separate tasks completely. The tilt, in my opinion, should be towards reachable, accessible wealth first, okay? So again, cash first, enough that a dead boiler is an annoyance rather than a crisis. Then money that you could sell inside a few days, right? Investments that are semi-liquid, which for most people means, stocks and shares ISA that holds their investment. Then there is the pension over and above all of that, which is brilliant, right? But stays locked until a certain period of time. That gets the money that you can sort of genuinely won't need before 55, 57. And then the house sits where it's always sat, right? Which is that it's somewhere to live. Your house is somewhere to live that also just happens to go up in value, right? It's not a strategy. It shouldn't be your plan. Obviously, you want to live in an unencumbered property in your retirement and so on and so forth. But as a reliable way to build wealth, sure, it might look great on a net worth tracker spreadsheet, right? But ultimately, to give you what you really want, which is passive income to give you the retirement, or, you know, an amount of runway so that you don't have to worry, that is not where it's at. So what I want you to do is go and do the other sum, okay? Not the net worth. You've already got that one in your head. I'm pretty sure you have. Everybody kind of has. And if you're watching this video, you probably have as well. Add up only what you could turn into spendable money inside like a month, right? Current account, savings, premium bonds, a general investment account, or anything else like that. Nothing with a bouncer on the door or liquidity factors. Nothing with a bloody bathroom in it, okay? Then take what your life honestly costs you to run for a month. So think about the real figure. Think about, you know, your mortgage, your food, every subscription to Netflix, everything you've got set up, and divide the first by the second number, right? That basically gives you this runway figure. Whatever that comes out to, that's the number worth knowing, okay? This is why it's so important, because those ONS figures, that goes up on its own, right? House prices drip up over time. The pension's going to tick up quietly over in the background, and you'll probably already arrive at that 209,600 figure eventually, whether you're paying attention or not. Your runway, however, this passive income source doesn't work like that. It moves when you move it deliberately. Every month you put something somewhere that you can actually reach it or generate a passive income from, it goes up, right? Every month you don't, it just sits exactly where it is. And that sort of passive income doesn't care about what your house is worth. I would rather any day of the week sit in a house worth, you know, with equity worth $500,000 and have £1 million invested than have a house worth £1 million and have £500,000 invested. I know it's a nuanced perspective in terms of standard of living and property and all that sort of stuff, but hopefully you get the point that I'm trying to make here. Now, most people assume getting that sort of £1 million of large semi-liquid investment portfolio that you can get your hands on at any sort of 1 or 2 weeks notice, that is of any size, would just be virtually impossible. Having £1 million invested is just a pipe dream, right? But it's not at all, in fact, which is why I really think that you should watch this video here next, because genuinely, there is only 3 levers that you need to understand and pull in the right way in order to get £1 million of investments way sooner than you ever thought you could, which will help you tilt your net worth towards more liquid, accessible money. So give it a click. I'll see you